Okay, good evening. Want to welcome you to this session, especially focused on the I-765 application and processing and things that may be helpful for you to know as you move into your next steps with the OPT application process. My name is Leah Zimmer. I'm the director of the International Student and Scholar Affairs Office, and I'm here with my colleague Cynthia Reeves, the assistant director in the office, and we will be talking through just a number of really detailed lists and processes to help you understand the process and then submit an effective application for OPT. As we talked in last week's session, all F1 students are eligible for the optional practical training benefit. And typically when students are beginning to gather their documents, they have lots of questions and there's a lot of different things to gather in the process. So we want to go over that this evening. Some of it may be review for you. We will repeat a number of things that are really essential for students to understand in the process. And we will just cover quite a bit of ground this evening. We are going to leave time at the end for questions. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put those in the Q&A attached, and we will likely address some of those, and some of those may be a little more detailed, and we're glad to address those at the end. So our agenda, just so you know where we're headed in the next 40 minutes or so, just broadly, what do you need to know about this I-765? What is the process for an OPT recommendation, which is what the ISSA office is going to issue to you as part of the process? What do you need to understand about the USCIS process? We will go specifically over the Form I-765, and this may be if you've looked at the form and thought, I know exactly what to do, why are we spending time here? There are just a few points that students tend to get tripped up by, and we want to make sure that that's an easy process for you as we go through. We'll address some common mistakes that we see students make each year. We will review sort of that general packet. What do you need to include both for the ISSA submission and for when you submit to USCIS? We'll have some instructions for mailing off that form, some reminders about authorization and what that means, and then a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. So broadly, what you need to know about the Form I-765 is that this is the application that you're submitting to USCIS that will hopefully result in the employment authorization document from the US government. And this is the card that you'll have as evidence that you are authorized to work in the US. The I-765 form is used for a number of different categories of immigration. And your category for this first application for post-completion OPT is going to be C3B. So any notes about the I-765 are going to be for the C3B applicable to your application process. For students who are going to be applying for STEM, when you submit that application next year, you'll actually be applying in a different category as a STEM applicant. So that'll be a different category code that you'll follow. One note, and we'll show you where this is confirmed on the I-765, it's really important to understand that you have to file the Form I-765 from within the US. And we'll talk through some of the exceptions we've heard about, but on the form it says you must be present in the US to file this form. And of course, we just want to add a caveat. We are going to give you some guidance based on our experience, based on the regs, based on the instructions provided by USCIS. But ultimately, a USCIS adjudicator is going to determine whether they approve your application or not. Generally, students are approved because you're eligible, because you've submitted an accurate and complete I-765 application packet. And if you are not approved, we can talk through at that point what your options are. And so we'll be talking through that. So just generally what you need to know, Form I-765, you're submitting to USCIS. That's how they're going to determine whether to approve you for OPT or not. Generally, students are approved if they are eligible and they've submitted that complete packet. And but again, we're going to do the best to give you the information we have right now. As things change, if they change, we will notify students. But this is based on current guidance that we have. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia to just do a quick review of that process for the OPT recommendation from the ISSA office.
Okay, so the first part is you're going to go into your ISSA link account, and then you're going to submit the OPT application e-form. This first E-form is a two-part process. You're going to submit the form, which lets us know that you're ready to apply for OPT. Within that form, you are going to provide us with your academic advisor's name and email address. Once you hit submit, that form will go to him or her, and they're just basically verifying the information that yes, you're the student and yes, you're in the process of graduating and all this information is correct. A second form that you're going to have to submit to us, which is new this semester, is to submit the I-765 application draft. So that's where you're going to upload to our office a copy of the completed I-765 plus the supporting documents for our office to do a courtesy review for you. One thing to note is that we cannot process or begin the processing of your OPT application until we have both the form that you completed and your advisor has signed off on that. So if you say, hey, I submitted this form a week ago, I haven't heard anything, we can look in and see if your advisor has completed the form. If not, we can't do anything till we have that from that advisor. So once we have those two forms from you, we will email you and let you know that both forms are final, and then we'll issue you the I-20 if ready for it. One thing on the form, you can select if you would like a consultation with someone in our office before we generate the documentation for you. And then if so, we can wait. But if you say, no, you do not need a consultation with any one of us, we'll just process the form as normal and then send it off to you with all your instructions as what you need to do. So when we send the application back to you, we'll have some recommended edits on there. And so you will need to make those edits to your physical application that you're going to mail off before you send it to USCIS. So you cannot just send them the form that we mark up, and with the changes, you will have to redo a form and put that on there for you. And then also you're going to make sure that you are tracking the receipt for when you start in the car.
Okay, so we want to tell you a little bit about the USCIS process, because once you mail off that application packet, it's a bit mysterious. It's out there and you're just waiting. You are going to send your application packet to the USCIS lockbox, which is currently in Chicago. And when it gets to the lockbox, somebody is going to physically open your application. They're going to do a quick review to make sure all the pages are there. They're going to run your check or credit card information and confirm that the payment goes through. If those things successfully go through, they'll push it through to the next process. They're going to scan your entire document in so that they can get that to a USCIS adjudicator. When your application gets to the lockbox, if there's any problem with your payment, let's say the credit card doesn't go through, let's say you forgot to sign the credit card form, a common mistake, maybe the check is not cashed, right? There's not enough money in your bank account at the time that they go to run the check, and it's not cashed. If that happens, if they determine immediately that you are missing pages or something isn't quite right, they're actually going to reject your application and send it back to you. If you submit that application packet and everything is fine, the payment goes through, they've approved your application documents, everything generally looks okay, they're going to scan that in and they'll send it to the next step with the adjudicator. It's really important that if it comes back to you and is rejected immediately, they'll send a note, they'll tell you why. It's important you contact our office because the OPT recommendation that we put in SEVIS is only valid for 30 days. And we want to make sure that we don't need to reissue that OPT recommendation for your resubmission application. If this happens within your program dates and before your program end date or during your grace period and you're present in the US, then you're still eligible to resubmit the application. And the same goes for when it gets sent to the adjudicator, the USCIS adjudicator. That's where the really thorough review is going to happen. And if your application is at that point denied for some reason, and they send your packet back to you from the adjudicator review, and you are within your program date, or you're within your grace period and you're present in the US, you are still eligible to resubmit the application. And that's why we want students to submit as early as possible, so that if for some reason a payment doesn't go through, if for some reason something is missing, you have time to resubmit the OPT application. The other thing that might happen during that adjudicator review process is they may just have questions about your application. They may want more information. Maybe there's something about your I-94 record that they have questions about. So they may send you a request for evidence, an RFE. And when that gets sent, it's going to be sent to the address that you put on the I-765 application as your mailing address. And so whatever address you choose, you want to be on the lookout for that receipt notice that may come from the lockbox if they approve your application and they move it forward, or if an RFE comes, or if your packet is rejected or denied. At any stage there, you're going to want to be tracking the mail after you've sent off your application. So I mentioned the receipt notice. That's going to generally come at the point that the lockbox office officials have determined that your packet is generally okay. It has all the elements, the payment has been processed. And when they send that to the adjudicator, that's when you're going to get the receipt notice. The receipt notice is only confirming that they have received your packet. There's nothing approving about that, but it's just a confirmation that they got it, okay? Because of delays with the pandemic, with short staff, with not allowing people to be physically present at the lockbox to open all of these applications, they are experiencing serious delays. And at this point, they've typically said that you need to wait 4 to 6 weeks for that receipt notice. You might get it earlier. That would be great news, but you'll have that particular delay. Once it gets to the adjudicator is really just confirming your eligibility. They're reviewing your SEVIS record. They're reviewing your application documents. And it's important to remember that that adjudicator is actually looking at a scanned copy of all of your documents. So when you're gathering everything, you want it to be really clear. That's why we recommend typing, entering instead of handwriting your application. But they're going to be making those determinations. And they are going to, if they approve it, forward that to a different office to actually process your card, okay? Once they have been issued, the card has been issued, it's going to go to a separate office to actually be shipped out. So there's some different stages here that you need to be aware of. One of the ways that you can track the progress is by the receipt notice. When the adjudicator approves your card or when the card is processed, you'll likely receive an approval notice, or you'll receive the EAD very quickly. But if you don't get that and you're just waiting, you can also go to MyUSCIS and with your receipt notice number, track the progress of your card. And Cynthia mentioned this at last week's session. Sometimes it will say that it's been approved, but it still has to be processed. It still has to be shipped. So there's these different stages. It could take a while. For some students, there's a week between the card being approved and receiving it. And for some students, they have to wait longer, 3 or 4 weeks. At no point in this process, once you've shipped off your packet, are you able to expedite that process. It just simply isn't going to happen. If they deny your application, if they reject it, it doesn't matter if you have a job offer at the end, you're going to have to resubmit and wait for them to move your documents to the process. I will note that a number of institutions that we are also a part of recently petitioned the Department of Homeland Security to recognize that the delays with processing dramatically impact our international students and their ability to begin employment after graduation. So there is a lot of advocacy professionally and from the university on your behalf with our representatives. So just know that that's happening. Once all of these things happen with USCIS, you still have to wait for that card to arrive and for you to reach the start date that's printed on the card for your authorization. You are not authorized when the adjudicator approves it. You're not authorized when the card is being processed. You're not authorized in the shipping process. It's really important to remember that you have to wait for the card to be in hand and you have to wait to reach that start date. The other thing I want to note is that on our end in your SEVIS record, typically, when you mail off the packet, your I-20 will read requested. We have requested the OPT on your behalf. We've recommended that USCIS give that to you. Once the lockbox has reviewed it, when they issue the receipt notice, then that requested comment on your SEVIS record will change to pending, and it will stay in pending until your card has actually been approved. So this whole process is happening while you're waiting. You've already sent off the packet and you're just waiting. So a few highlights. If that packet is rejected or denied, contact us because we may need to cancel that original OPT recommendation and reissue a new recommendation, right? A second note, you are not authorized until that card's in hand and you've reached the start date printed. If you report employment before your authorization start date, we have to terminate your SEVIS record, which means you cannot participate in OPT any longer. If they authorize you, USCIS authorizes you, but you work outside of that authorization period, we have to terminate your SEVIS record and you lose the OPT benefit. It is absolutely essential you hear us on this conversation around authorization. The third note is just a reminder that regardless of what myuscis.gov says about the status of your card or the approval notice, you are not authorized to work until you have the card. Those are not authorizations. The card, the EAD, is the only document that authorizes you to work. And the fourth thing to remember is that we can help you kind of navigate communicating with USCIS, but USCIS will only speak to you as the applicant. They won't speak to us, right? Because your application is between you and the US government. We've issued that recommendation and that's ISSA's role in that process. They are not going to speak with us, but we have frequently, if students have questions, they want to call in, we can support you, give you language for how to talk with them. And occasionally we've just stayed on the phone with you to make sure you've answered all the questions. USCIS is notoriously pretty quiet about the process and where you are, but ultimately you'll need to contact them to make that happen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly and start sharing a different screen because we want to go through the I-765 form. And Cynthia, can you see that? Is that?
I can, yes.
Perfect. Okay, let me put it in front of me. And this will put it back. Okay. So we just wanted to go through the form a little bit quickly and talk about some essential notes here. The first thing that you want to make sure is that you are always downloading the most recent I-765 form from the USCIS website. Currently, the most recent form expires on 7/31/2022. And when I go down to the form at the bottom here, it says the edition is valid as of August 25th, 20. So make sure that you're using the correct form. You'll notice that here it says type or print in black ink. They are not kidding. Do not use blue ink. Don't use other kinds of ink. And again, we really recommend that you type it so that your name is spelled correctly on the card so that there's no confusion about your application. All students are applying for initial permission to accept employment. So that's the box that you're going to check here for post-completion OPT. And it's really important that you include your name as it is written on your passport. Those documents need to match across. So make sure that your name that you're entering here matches. For your middle name, if you don't have that listed on your passport, in some cases, students have left this blank. And in some cases, students have written none or NA. I will just note that in the instructions here, it says if a question does not apply to you, type or print NA unless otherwise directed. And if there's a numeric response is 0 or none, then you need to type or print none. Most PDF programs will not actually allow you to write N/A, and so you have to handwrite that in afterwards. That's totally fine, but you want to make sure that any field that you do not have an answer for that you filled in with NA or none. None of these fields should be left blank. The last thing I want to note on this first page is that when you print off the I-765, you want to make sure that when you print it, this barcode at the bottom is visible, because this is how the lockbox team is going to scan in your document and track it. And you want to ensure that this is fully legible to those scanners when you print off the document. For those of you who have applied for OPT, that scanner code is new. And so you want to make sure that whatever form you're using includes that. I want to talk a little bit about the mailing addresses. You will need to distinguish either what address you'll use that will be available in the next 3 to 5 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks when the receipt notice arrives, and what address will be available to you in the next 3 to 6 months as you're waiting for your EAD card to arrive. Most students will get that card within 4 months, but you do want to have an address that will be stable for that time period. Because USCIS is looking to shift to a particular signatory requirement for the EAD card, and we don't know when they will authorize that to be active, you cannot use the ISSA address. Previously, we were able to let students do that, but now that they're moving towards this required signature, we are not going to be able to have you use our address. That US mailing address, again, should be stable. There is a process for changing your address. It's in the I-765 instructions that if you do move or you put down a friend's name and they're going to move now, that you can update your address with USCIS. Really important that all of this is the same, but this does not necessarily need to match your current physical address. So when we come down to 7A through 7D, that is your current address right now. It does not matter if that's going to change in the next 2 to 6 months. This is just where are you living when you submitted this application. It does need to be a US physical address. When we come down to other information, very few F1 students are going to have an alien registration number or a USCIS online account number. So you could just write none. If you have this number, you know you have it. And so that will be very clear to you, but most F1 students don't have it. You're going to answer these questions, make sure to mark. If you have ever filed a Form I-765 before, you will have only done that if you have applied for OPT in the past as an F1 student. Any other circumstance, you'd be pretty clear on whether you had applied for authorization. The USCIS does allow you to apply for a social security number on this form, and you can do that, or you can wait until you actually have employment during your OPT period. If you already have a social security number, you're going to enter that here on 13B. And here on the top, generally, you could put a line through 14 and 15 because you're not going to answer it. But generally, USCIS wants these fields blank, these blank fields filled with NA or none if they don't apply to you. Now I'm going to pause here. Cynthia, do you have anything you want to add about this page or the first 2 pages?
No, not yet. So you got everything good so far.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The countries of citizen nationality. If you are a dual citizen, you need to list both countries. If you are the citizen of only one country, then you're going to list that in 18A, but you do need to write in A on 18B. So when we come to page 3, it's going to be lots more information about you. Not all of you are going to have a state or province of birth, and that's fine. That's where we're going to put NA. You want to make sure that for date of birth that you enter it US style. I'm sure that's second nature now, but just remember that's what they're going to be looking for. Your Form I-94 record, you're going to Google your I-94 record, and whatever your current arrival record number is, you're going to enter that. Passport number, very few of you will have an additional travel document. Your passport is your travel document, and so you can just write none here. And see, all of these are pretty self-explanatory. The place of your last arrival into the US, you can typically enter the 3-digit code for the airline that you came in on, or excuse me, the airport. So for Boston, BOS, Chicago, O'Hare is ORD, Detroit, I believe is DET. Any of those, whatever your last arrival, port of entry arrival was into the US, that's what you're going to enter. You notice here you're going to identify the immigration status, your last arrival, F1 student, F1 student. Your SEVIS number is your current SEVIS number that you have that you're applying for OPT with. And here at number 27 is where you're going to identify your eligibility category, and all students applying for post-completion OPT are going to be entering C3B. This is also on our website as just a note of reminder. Even if you are a STEM eligible student, your major is STEM eligible, you are not going to complete 28, 29, 30, this entire section. You will complete this when you apply for the STEM extension in the future, But right now, it is going to be not applicable for all of these questions, regardless of whether you are STEM or not. So 27, everyone is going to enter C3B for post-completion OPT. The rest of this page, you're going to write NA or leave those yes and no's blank. Similarly, here on 30, none of this is applicable to your eligibility category. 31, through this, you are not going to answer those questions. They don't apply to your category. And so here in part 3 is your applicant statement. So you are going to click 1A, I can read and understand English. I've read and understand every question. You're going to include your telephone number. And again, here, you don't want to leave this blank. So even if you only have one phone number, you're going to enter it for both blanks. And your applicant email address should be your non-Notre Dame email address. Down here on the applicant signature, you want to make sure that you read everything that you are signing. And I will actually just come back up to the top here. I mentioned earlier that you have to file this Form I-765 while in the United States. And this is in part 3, where the form is very clear about where you must be located when you file this form. Cynthia and I can both tell you about students, however, who were outside of the US when it was time to file for OPT. They sent their application to somebody in the US and they filed it and it went through. But we can't guarantee. The form says you have to be present in the US. And so we have to advise you, you should be present in the US when you file your application. And we would strongly recommend you remain in the US until at least that receipt notice arrives. And again, we talked last week about the risks of traveling while you're waiting on the approval to come through. And so you want to keep that in mind. Go back if you missed that session last week. But must be present in the US. You're signing here in part 3, 7A, 7B, saying, I've read this, I get it, I understand what I'm submitting. And USCIS is ultimately going to hold you responsible for what you're submitting. Just a small note about signatures. Make sure that your signature is fitting in the little box and not going outside of the lines, just a pickiness for some USCIS adjudicators. And the other thing is that you need to make sure that you physically sign this form yourself, what they would call a wet signature. Do not use a digital signature. There were some exceptions made last year in the midst of the pandemic, but we do know of students whose applications were denied, even though that was supposed to be allowed. And they had some trouble convincing USCIS to accept the application with a digital signature. So make sure that you physically sign that with black ink. This date of signature is important because you need to submit the application within a particular timeline of 60 days after you've signed it. But all of you are going to submit this soon, and so that should not be a problem. Part 4 and 5 is typically not applicable to F1 students and to our students. And so this is a space where you could just cross off the entire section and write NA, or you can enter NA into every field. Students have done both in this section. And now we come to page 7. Part 6 on page 7. Again, this is just the application. This tends to be the trickiest page for students. And I will tell you that if you have ever had CPT authorization, if you have ever had an EAD card before, or if you have ever studied in the US with a different SEVIS number, you will have to complete one of the sections of page 7. And we've given you instructions here on how to do that. If you have CPT authorization, you're going to include the employer name, your start date, end date, your part-time, full-time status with that CPT, and whatever academic level you were approved for. You are also going to include a copy of the I-20 with CPT authorization with your packet. OPT is very similar. You're going to have very similar information, but now you're going to have your previous EAD card number, and you're going to include a copy of that EAD card. And in some cases, it might be wise to also include the I-20 with OPT authorization on it. If you have a previous SEVIS ID, you studied here as an undergrad, but with a different SEVIS ID number, maybe you took a leave of absence, you came back, you got a new SEVIS ID number, you need to indicate that on the form. And again, previous CVIS ID, your academic level, what school did you study with under that, and what were your program dates. You'll want to include a copy of that I-20. And generally, you don't want to give USCIS more information than they've asked for, but in this case, they have asked for this. So you need to provide the documentation of whatever you enter here. I will also note that when I was filling this out, I wrote none, and then I was like, NA actually is more applicable here, so I'm going to cross it off. And I left this here because we just want to remind you, if you make a mistake on this form, we would strongly recommend that you just reprint the form, put in the NAs again on their own. Do not cross out information. Do not use whiteout on this form under any circumstances. Just print off another copy so that you are submitting a clean copy and you are not leaving the adjudicator with any questions about these pieces of paper that you're submitting.
I want to add 2 things about page 7.
Please.
As Leah showed here, you want to make sure you're using one section for each thing. Don't try to cram the OPT and CPT under one section. So put one thing under, what's that, 3A, and then 3 and 4D, put one thing each. And then the second thing is for CPT and OPT, where it requires you to submit a copy of a previous I-20. If you do not have that, instead of an I-20, you can submit a letter, because you have to submit something stating that you had CPT for these dates, you no longer have access to the document. So if it's a CPT that we authorize for you, we can provide you a copy of that I-20, or it's from another institution, you can reach out to that school. And then if they cannot, then the last resort would be to provide a letter to submit with this, because they'll ask for cases for that.
The other thing you'll notice on page 7 is that we strongly recommend that you sign the bottom of page 7 and put the date on that. So let's say that you have had no CPT, no OPT, you've never had another CVIS ID number. In that case, your page 7 is going to look like this. A whole lot of NA on top of NA. You're going to sign the bottom and you're going to put the date. We talked about how those other pages, those parts about interpreters and somebody assisting you with this form don't apply to most students at University of Notre Dame or F1 status. And you still have to submit those pages. USCIS will reject your application if you don't submit those. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. So that's the I-765 form, and we'll talk a little bit about some other pieces now.
And while she's pulling it up, I will say I'm answering the questions as quickly as possible. You guys are getting them in there quick.
Very good. Okay, Cynthia, so you're on to avoiding common mistakes.
Yes. So the most important thing is, so the earliest USCIS can receive your application is 90 days before your program end date. You do not want to have your document arrive more than 90 days before that, because even if they receive it one day earlier, they will reject your packet and send it back, and you will need to start all over. As Leah mentioned, something else you also want to make sure you do is, whenever possible, type your answers into the I-765. And in some places where you're unable to type, you will have to do handwriting. So it is fine to have typed answers and handwritten answers. You just want to make sure that the handwritten answer are as clear as possible. For the I-765, you have to submit all 7 pages. Even as how Leah just went over page 7, if none of that applies to you, you still need to submit it. They will send your packet back if you do not send page 7. So you want to make sure all 7 pages are submitted with the application. Make sure that you're reading all the instructions, mainly on the pages that are listed here, which goes over how to fill in the sections, the documentation that is required, what happens if you were to need a replacement card, and the process for changing the address while the application is pending, which is very important. So you may use an address now and then something happens and you may need to move. There's a way for you to go in to report that you need to update that address. because this is considered government mail and it won't forward. So generally, if you move, mail will forward to you. This particular mail would not forward. So you want to make sure that you are going in and changing the mailing address if need be. You want to confirm the dates on the form, as Leah has showed you in the beginning, which were highlighted as yellow, to make sure that you are make sure that you are using the most recent edition. So when you're completing the I-765, I would just go directly to the USCIS website and take it directly from there. So that way, you know, it's the most up-to-date form to use. Number 8 is, even though it's number 8, this is the most important one. So when you're filing the I-765, there is a filing fee of $410. Usually that payment is paid by money order, check, or credit card. The credit card is the main reason why packets are rejected. So what I suggest is, when you mail out that packet, make sure you're notifying your financial institution or the credit card company to let them know that there will be a payment of $410 coming through from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Because most banks are being proactive, thinking maybe it's not legit, and then they deny the charge. And then if that charge is denied, it's going to have your packet sitting back. So I just suggest reach out to them and let them know that this is a legit charge that's coming through. Please pay it so it's not rejected.
And we also often just recommend money order as the most consistent way to pay, most effective way to pay. So that's also just a side note there.
Okay, so we are going to talk about the application packet as to what's needed. So we broke this down into 2 sections. What you would need to send to us for review, and then what you need to send in your packet to USCIS. So for us, when you complete the e-form, you're going to also send us a completed form of the I-765. We need the biographical page of your passport and visa, if applicable, because if you're Canadian, you won't need that. Even if your visa is expired, you can still send us a copy. That is totally fine. We'll need a copy of your most recent I-94 record and copy of any previously issued EAD cards. If you've never had any EAD cards, you don't want to worry about that. Just send everything else. When it comes time for you to send the packet off to USCIS, if we've made any edit recommendations to your application, you're going to submit the new application with the edits made on there, plus the copy of the OPT recommendation I-20 that we're going to send back to you. And then again, we'll need the copy of the biographical page of the passport, visa, and I-94 record. It does not matter if the copies of the visa and the passport are in black and white or color. You just want to make sure they're as clear as possible. You're going to also send any copies of previous EAD cards, copies of any additional I-20s that you may have for OPT or CPT authorization, the filing fee, and the passport style photos. So the passport style photos is also very important. The photos that you send must be brand new photos, not used for anything before, and they must have been taken within the last 6 months. So if you have like leftover passport photos or that you use for anything else, do not use those photos because that gets rejected. So you just want to go take 2 brand new photos. You can go actually anywhere to get them taken. You can go to the post office, Walgreens, CVS, get 2 brand new passport style photos. And then the photos that you submit with your packet is the actual photo that will be placed on your EAD card.
I think I say this on another slide, but as you're putting together, and I think it's even on this one actually, as you're putting this together, we often put the photos in just a small plastic bag that you can paper clip to your application. Yes. Don't use any staples on this. Just remember, when you send this to the lockbox, somebody is going to scan this in, and you want to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. Yeah. And they're going to pull your payment, pull your photos. So, yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about mailing of the packet. So once we're going to send you back everything electronically. So what you're going to have to do is once we send you that electronic copy of your new OPT recommendation I-20, you're going to make sure that you print that off and sign the document. You're going to keep the electronic version for yourself or print a hard copy for yourself if you're like, and then one copy that you print off, you're going to put with the packet to mail off. Make sure that you review the packet, that everything is in order and accurate before you send it off. As was mentioned earlier, so currently the lockbox, they just put one in Chicago. So it can get there very quickly. So mail out first day receipt. So as we mentioned earlier, you don't want them to receive your packet early or it will be rejected. We want to also make sure we recommend that you get tracking on your packet that you mail out. So it doesn't matter if you go to UPS, FedEx, or if you go to the post office, just make sure you get tracking so you can track where your packet is and when it has received them. How you mail your packet depends on what address you mail the packet to. So if you're going to use USPS, they'll deliver to a post office box. If you do express like UPS or FedEx, they cannot deliver to a post box. They actually have to have someone sign for the shipment. So you will use the address that is not a post box. And then you just want to make sure you have that correct address when you send the packet.
Okay. So we've answered a number of questions in the Q&A, and we'll address a few of those just here in a second. We just want to remind you one more time, and you've probably heard it 7 times if you listened to us last week as well. It's really your responsibility to manage this process. We're here to help. We do have a role to play because we have to issue that I-20 with the OPT recommendation, and we will give you feedback. We do kind of the courtesy review of your I-765 application packet to make sure that you have everything that you need. Please don't hesitate to ask us questions. There's never too many questions. We would much rather you ask in advance of making a decision or doing something, and rather than wait and have trouble later. So please continue to reach out to us in the process. That's what we're here for, is to help you. We may not have answers because USCIS is adjudicating. They have their own timelines, but we do want to be helpful. If you have any employment opportunity within the authorization period and you have been authorized, you have the EAD card in hand, please remember you have to report it. Somebody asked in the chat, if I have, once I get a job, do I have to submit another application? And no, you are applying for this 1 year of authorization. So that whole period you're authorized, but you do have a responsibility to report it and to ensure that you're not working outside of that authorization period. It doesn't matter if something is paid or unpaid, if it's 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, short-term opportunity, you want to make sure that you touch base with us. I think I need to report this, and we'll talk with you through that. If you have an opportunity come up that is outside of your authorization period or is not connected to your major, then you're going to have to decline that opportunity. And that is not a judgment that our office is making. The immigration regulations are very clear. You are only authorized for the dates on your EAD card and when you have that EAD card in hand, and every opportunity that you take advantage of during your 1 year of authorization must be related to your field of study, the major printed on your Form I-20 for this authorization. So that's really, really essential. If you have any questions about your OPT application, we have students who come in and meet with us a couple of times. There's no shame in that. Touch base with us. And because of the pandemic, because we can't sit across the table from you and look at it with you, it's complicated. So feel free to reach out and we'll help guide through the process. We do want to address maybe just a few more questions that came up. One of the students said, where do we find our STATUS ID? And that's printed on your Form I-20 in the top right-hand corner, right above where it says F1 visa, right? So it says category, what category, F1 visa. Right above that, it's a number that starts with the letter N. A few students have asked, and Cynthia covered this, if you have multiple CPT authorizations, you are going to put each one in its own box on page 7. And so if you have too many CPT authorizations, especially for our PhD students, you have so many CPT authorizations from your 6 or 7 years on campus, then you're going to put 1 in each box. 3 gets 1, 4 gets 1, 5 gets 1, 6 gets 1. And then you can add a separate piece of paper and follow the same format on that piece of paper for reporting the additional CPT authorizations. Somebody asked if part 6 is not applicable to us, can we just slash the section? And yes, we showed that on the piece of paper. You can either write an A in each section or just put a large slash. The instructions are more explicit on this version of the form than they have been in the past, which is why we would generally advise you to do the NA on each field, each empty field. But previously, students have been fine just putting a large slash through those pages that don't apply. Cynthia, feel free to jump in if you see a question that I'm.
I do see one question that I meant to mention. A lot of people ask, does it matter if they print single-sided or double-sided for mail off their application? It does not matter, whichever you're more convenient. Most people do double-sided to save on paper. So that is.
Yeah, and a student has asked on page 7, what does the first row of our examples mean with the N and NXXX? That's where your SEVIS ID number is going to go. So SEVIS ID, and then is it CPT authorization, OPT authorization? What is that? Another student has asked, what's the difference between none and NA? Usually none is going to go where they're asking for a number, and NA is going to go where they're asking for a non-numerical response, maybe someone's name.
Someone asked if they can sign a job offer before they get their OPT approved. Yes, you can accept the job offer, but you cannot begin working that job until your OPT has been approved. You must wait till you have the card and the start date on the card has been reached.
And this is where you want to be in really good communication with your employer as you're waiting on that approval to come through. That's one thing that you'll have to navigate. Career development may be able to help you think through how to have those difficult conversations if your card is delayed.
Someone asked if their passport photos have to be different or you're going to have the 2 same photos for the application. So you have to just take 2 photos and send them both with the application.
Somebody has asked, is the OPT application on the ISSA link, is that mandatory? There are 2 forms that Cynthia went over. It's that OPT application, and that's the process where you're confirming the dates that you want for your application. And we are getting confirmation from your advisor that you are eligible to graduate this coming May, and that they're approving that your eligibility for that. That's all that first form is for. And where you are initially telling us what dates you want for your authorization period. That draft application is where you're uploading a draft that we can review and just ensure that you haven't missed anything vital on that application packet. So both forms are required. Somebody asked, if I have a job offer, do I need to send evidence of that to USCIS? And you do not. Previously, like 5 years ago, sometimes students could submit a job offer letter and ask USCIS to expedite based on that job offer start date, but that has not been the case for a number of years. So there's no reason to include a job offer letter with your application. USCIS is not authorizing you for that job. They are authorizing you for a period of time after graduation during which you can work. Somebody asked, do the other dates, like my dates on my money order or the issue date of my OPT I-20 need to be within 90 days? And they do not. That's an excellent question. So we can process your OPT recommendation now if you're going to be submitting it in the next 3 weeks. That can be before that 90 days. It is that USCIS cannot receive your packet more than 90 days in advance of your program end date. That's a great question. And also, if you are going to use that credit card form, that G1145, then yes, you are going to put that in with your packet. You're just going to put it on top of everything else. So that lockbox officer knows exactly how to process your payment and knows what you'll be processing. Somebody asked about the shipping options, which is quicker, and it's really your preference of what company you want to use, what fees you want to pay. There isn't a quicker, faster option necessarily. If they say 2-day, it's going to be 2-day. If they say overnight, it's going to be overnight. It's really what your preference is and what fees you might want to pay. But again, as Cynthia noted, because the lockbox is so close to us, if you send it the day before and it gets to them to Chicago and they enter it as having arrived that day and it's too early, they'll reject it. They'll send it right back to you. So you don't want to play with those dates.
Mm-hmm. It just moved on me. Someone asked, what was the process of getting a new F1 visa after graduation if it expires during OPT? So you only need the visa. If you're going to stay in the US and your visa is expired, you will not need to obtain a new visa. And you cannot obtain a new visa from within the United States. So if you're going to exit the US and you would have to apply for a new visa, you would still apply for an F1 student visa. But if you exit and your visa, if you exit the US, your visa is expired and your OPT has not yet been approved, you will have to wait until your OPT is approved before they will issue you a new visa. So you want to make sure you consider that before you exit if you have to. But if you're just staying in the US, you're totally fine to remain in the US on an expired visa.
Yeah. So somebody asked, is Part 6 related only to previous EIDs or previous work authorizations? It's CPT, OPT, and SEVIS IDs are the main reasons that you're going to be filling out Part 6 on page 7. So if you are outside of that and you have questions, should I report this here? You should ask that, send us an email and we'll review that. But typically Part 6 is work authorization and have you studied in the US under a previous SEVIS ID?
Someone asked, do they pay the $410 fee in advance? No, you don't pay it in advance. You include the payment with your packet that you're sending off to USCIS.
Somebody asked if they need to submit any supporting documents or evidence when they report employment, and you do not. So when you report employment via ISSALink or through the SEVP portal, you are giving the information about that position. You're going to tell us what are you doing, how is it connected to your major. You're going to tell the position title. You're going to provide information about your supervisor. You're going to provide the address, but you're actually entering all of that directly into the SEVP portal. You're not uploading a job offer letter. You're not uploading that to ISSALink if you use ISSALink. You're not doing any other evidence. It's really very much a kind of a trust system. And what you want to make sure of is that you have documentation of any employment that you've reported so that if USCIS does an investigation, if they stop by your place of employment, if they reach out to you and want confirmation about what you're doing, you have evidence to support what you've reported, but you are not submitting any of that right now. For those of you who are going to be applying for the STEM extension, that answer will change next year, and we'll have more information about that when you get ready for that application process.
I don't think Leah answered this one, but I want to answer it. Someone asked, should I put, if I use a cash payment, can I put it in the package? You cannot mail cash. You can only do check, money order, or credit card. Do not put cash in the envelope.
So a couple of questions around the form in ISSALink. When you're entering what date you want as your authorization start date, wait until you have a pretty good idea of when you want that to be. Because once you submit that, we're going to begin the process of reviewing all of your documents. It can change, but you do want to have some good idea about what that date's going to be because you're asking your advisor to really sign off on that in some way. But you can put the close estimate, I would say, have a good sense of where you want your authorization period to begin. And you will have, before you mail off your packet, you'll have some opportunities to update that. Somebody else has asked, how stringent is the OPT requirement for the job offer to be within the same field? And again, to this point about you are self-reporting the employment and you are going to provide a description of how it's connected to your major and to your field of study. It may not be sufficient that it's just that they're looking for PhD consultants. It really should be connected to your field, but ultimately you're going to be defining that relationship. It's really possible that nobody ever looks at that or reviews it or reaches out to you. And it's possible that in a review of your SEVIS record, a USCIS or SCVP adjudicator does reach out and they want more evidence. And at that point, they may have more questions. For those of you who are going to apply for the STEM extension, that's when your application is going to have even a deeper review. And those of you applying for the H-1B visa, again, there's going to be a much more thorough review of your employment history in the US and did you abide by the immigration regulations. And the regulations say that any employment during OPT authorization period needs to be connected to your major. Can you be creative and describe a really great connection between that opportunity and your major? Possibly, but it will be up to USCIS to determine whether they accept that reason. We are not making that judgment in our office. A student said, is there any impact if I didn't report my job end date during my last OPT? The end date was the day of the OPT end date. If you are still employed through your OPT end date, there's some assumption on the part of SCVP and USCIS. I wouldn't anticipate that there would be any negative impact, but we couldn't guarantee. Again, those decisions are going to be happening in a different office. I would not necessarily worry about it if you were employed to that OPT end date. That's what the SCVP and USCIS are going to assume. If it was different than that, then you might be more worried. Someone asked, should we leave the parents' names blank? And no, do not leave those fields blank. Write NA, print off the document, and write in N/A for those blank fields. I think that some of these have been answered. If I need to change my program end date, do I need to request a new OPT before I submit my recommendation form? You will, we'll ask more questions about your program end date if that does not align with your OPT recommendation dates. So if there's any question about that, we'll reach out before moving forward. Generally, if you have, let's say, a May 2022 graduation date, you filled out the OPT application form and said, actually, I'm graduating in May of 2021. We're going to update that program end date to reflect the May 2021 graduation and program completion.
I will just say out loud, because I've answered this questions, typed a couple of times. Payments are made payable to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And we'll give you that information as well when we send you your packet back.
Mm-hmm. Somebody just asked again, can we send out our OPT applications to the ISSA office before that 90-day period? And you can. You can start the process now. If you're graduating in May of 2021, you can fill out that OPT application form. You can submit a draft, that I-765 application draft into ISSA Link right now. I think you answered this. Yeah, someone said if you start to work under OPT, SCVP could send a rep out to investigate, hey, this student said that they're working at this location. We're just verifying their employment. That could happen. It has not happened frequently. The pandemic has certainly stopped that in many ways, but SCVP or USCIS or another agency within the Department of Homeland Security could stop by your place of employment. And that's why it's really important that whatever you're reporting to this SCVP portal, or to us, and then we put it into SCVP's portal, that it's accurate, and that if they're looking for you to ask questions, that they can find you pretty easily. You have that obligation to report employment and your address within 10 days. We have had very few instances of a student having someone check up on them. And so just know it's not often, but it is important that your information is correct. I think we are getting to the end of the questions. In the last, we'll just take 4 or 5 more minutes, excuse me. Somebody asked about reporting their graduation date to an employer. That's going to be completely outside of anything that you're reporting on OPT application. And so that would be a conversation that you'll just need to have directly with your employer. We talked about program end dates, potential program end dates in our last conversation, and that will vary slightly from undergraduates to graduate students, for students who have a thesis or don't have a thesis or dissertation. So you can ask that in conversation with the advisor. Somebody asked, if my end date is before the end of the semester, does any further stipend also stop, or does it continue to the end of the semester? What happens with registration? This is particularly applicable for our PhD students, and I would recommend for whoever asked that question, just set up an appointment with an advisor so we can talk through your timeline of when you are going to have your program end date and when you're defending your dissertation. There's some nuance there that really varies by student. So it might help to have that conversation one-on-one rather than a broad answer right now. The question for number 27 on the I-765 is your eligibility category. So when you're reading the I-765 instructions, that eligibility category is at C3B. And so anything within that document about C3B applicants is applicable to you. Vacation days, are they counted as unemployment days? And this refers back to you have 90 days of unemployment that you are allowed within that authorization period. And vacation days are not. If you have a contract with a company, you are engaged in employment, and one of the benefits of working for that company is days off, then those days off are not hurting your unemployment counts. You are still reporting yourself as employed by that company. But if you stop employment, that's when the unemployment begins. Why does USCS need previous work, CVIS, OPT, CPT information? Doesn't actually apply to me. I'm just curious. I think that they want to confirm that you've reported accurately what your participation has been within the immigration system previously. And I think it's just one of those checks. Cynthia, would you agree that's really what that is?
Yes.
And there's also some cases with CPT. If you have more than 12 months of full-time CPT on that CVIS ID, you aren't eligible for OPT. And while they can see that in the CVIS record, they still want to have you verify that you understand that as well. We are almost done, friends. When we want to organize a consultation via ISSALink, which type of appointment would you look for? We have a number of appointments open that are labeled OPT appointments, OPT application appointments. If you are ready to have a long, extended conversation about OPT and go through your packet and do this longer conversation, choose one of those times. If you have one question that you just need to verify, you can use any of our F1J1 registration appointments. That's totally fine. But once you're ready to have the conversation about OPT and you've got a lot of questions, sign up for one of those OPT application appointments. Common reasons for an RFE are typically it seems from your CVIS record, you have quite a bit of CPT. Maybe it seems like you haven't reported something that's on your CVIS record that is missing from the Form I-20. Cynthia, can you think of other reasons students have gotten RFEs? They do not come very often. And I will say typically these days they've just been denying. One case, a student had used a digital signature and that was denied rather than an RFE. But typically it's going to be around what have you reported? Does it align with what's on your CVIS record? Which is why you want to make sure you're being pretty forthright on the application. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, no, I was reading. Sorry. Let's see.
Okay. Someone says if we obtain our EAD card and leave the country with an expired F1 visa, I think you answered that one. Are we able to re-enter the U.S. for employment with just the EAD card? No, the EAD card is not a travel document. It's an employment document. You always need a valid F1 visa. You always need a valid I-20 and travel signature and valid passport to travel. The EAD is only valid for employment authorization. And somebody said, assuming I get a job and OPT is approved for July, but my visa expires in December of 2021, is it realistic to be able to go to Europe and get a visa extension within 1 month? That varies widely. In the pandemic, I would say absolutely not. If you do not have a valid visa, I would stay put in the US until embassies are really open and processing applications. In a typical year, It really varies even then between the embassies and processing time, and you would want to reach out directly to the embassy that you'll be applying at. I think that we have tackled all of the questions. Oh no, friends, you keep popping them in there. Your B visa, someone asked, if my F1 visa expires, can I use a B1 visa that's valid to enter the US, or does that expire? The B visa, the F visa are completely different visa categories. They are not related to one another, except that sometimes when the embassy issues an F1, they cancel your B1. If they did not cancel your B1, it is valid, but you cannot enter the US with the B1 and work. You cannot enter the US with a B1 or an ESTA visa and say, well, I have my I-20, I have my EAD, I just entered with my B. When you enter the US in B status or with the ESTA as a visitor or tourist, you are subject to the rules associated with that visa category. If you want to work with your I-20 and EAD card, you must enter it with the F1 visa. Super great question, and definitely just want to make sure that you are clear on that. What happens if you had CPT approved, but because of COVID, the internship went remote and I worked abroad remotely? Should I still report that? Yes, if you were authorized for CPT, you should put it on there. You can include a note that you didn't end up using it because you were abroad, or you can just indicate that because of the pandemic, you had to move abroad. That's fine. And a last question. Do you need to request anything from ISSA to renew an F1 visa after you start OPT? We would recommend that you make sure your I-20 shows that you've been approved for OPT. Make sure that you have a travel signature, but that's really what you need. You want to make sure that if you've begun working with that EAD card, that you've reported the employment, because that will actually be printed on the back of your Form I-20. So generally, though, you're going to take the exact same documents to that visa appointment that you did when you were an enrolled student, but you'll have the EAD card or the approval notice. You'll have an I-20 that has your employer or authorization printed if you don't have an employer yet. So, friends, it has been a lot of information that we've been throwing at you. Please reach out to us if you have any questions, and ISSA, get started on those forms at ISSALink. And we're really excited to help you submit a complete and accurate application packet to USCIS for your OPT. I wish you a wonderful evening and look forward to talking soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.